What's up, everyone? I'm your local sleepy bat, Mistic. Welcome to Mistic Rex. I'm not really sure what this video is about, but it's called It's Freaking Bats. So, obviously, I had to check it out. It's by Clint's Reptiles, and it's about bats. What more do I need to watch it? So, let's see what we learn, I guess, maybe. I'm not sure really what it is, but let's get into it.
Well, hi there. This
Hello.
is a bat.
It
and
is.
so is this. And so is this. You've probably seen bats before.
Yeah.
There are around 1,400 species of bats.
Yeah.
About a quarter of all mammal species are bats.
Yeah.
They're very successful. It's
I
freaking
am.
bats.
I'm very
There's
successful.
just something very beneficial about being able to fly.
Yeah.
Which probably explains why birds are the most successful reptiles and the only surviving dinosaurs. And insects are the most successful group of animals on the entire planet.
What
In fact,
butterflies are
the
like?
pterosaurs are the only group of known flighted animals that are not thriving today. So
Okay.
flight has evolved at least 3 different times in vertebrates
Yeah.
and once in arthropods. And while the basic concept of powered flight using wings remains constant, the structure of those wings is very different in each one. And it also explains why birds are found all over the globe, including the polar regions, and bats are restricted to warmer regions. Bird wings are actually very small. You know this if you've ever eaten a chicken. The basic tetrapod
I've
arm,
never had
which are the
wings.
terrestrial vertebrates, is essentially like your arm. A single bone
My
in the radius,
arm.
2 bones in the forearm, the radius and ulna, and a bunch of hand bones. We observed this previously when we looked at whales. And you see it in birds, though the hand bones are highly fused. The whole wing is basically a rigid shaft with 4 points of articulation if you include the shoulder. Fewer in hummingbirds. This is the living portion of the wing. But this structure wouldn't function as a wing if it weren't covered in feathers, which are mostly dead, like your hair. Pterosaur wings were more like bat wings, and like your arm. They have a humerus, a radius and ulna, and then a very long hand, especially the metacarpals, which are these bones here, and the ring finger. The word pterodactyl even means wing finger. It makes sense. The majority of the wing is just metacarpals and ring finger.
Okay.
The other 3 fingers stick out of the top of the wing and function like fingers, and they have no pinky finger. The surface area of the wing was not dead like in birds, but was made of living skin, like in bats. The bat wing lacks the long metacarpals of the pterosaur wing, but instead of being made of a single finger, it is made up of all 4 fingers, with only the thumb protruding from the top of the wing and still functioning essentially like a normal finger. Again, the surface area comes from living skin and not from dead feathers as in birds. And this means that bats have a huge amount of living surface area. And being homeotherms, animals that maintain a constant body temperature using energy from food, they lose heat very quickly. This is beneficial in warm environments, but devastating in the cold. Hence their limited range as compared to their dead-winged distant cousins, the birds. It also means that they need to eat foods that are high in calories, like nectar, fruit, and other animals, including, at times, people. So now I want to fly through the roughly 1,400 bat species and how they're related, because I'm into that kind of thing. Now, I have heard bats referred to as rats with wings many times, but it turns out that the closest relatives to rats that fly are humans. Though flying squirrels are more closely related to rats, it is just that they don't fly, they fall with style. Bats, interestingly enough, are more closely related to whales, sea lions, and pangolins than they are to rats. They're closer to being rhinoceroses with wings. And many of them do have some odd noses and poor vision. At first glance, it would appear that there are fundamentally 2 groups of bats.
Is my nose
the
odd?
little big-eared echolocating bats, the Microchiroptera, and the big, small-eared visual bats, the Megachiroptera. But more recent studies, including genetic analysis and fossil analysis, tell a different story. Now it appears that the Megachiropteran bats fall right into the middle of the Microchiroptera, making Microchiroptera, without the Megachiroptera, a paraphyletic group. The most distantly related bats to the other bats are not the Megachiroptera, but a different group, the Yangochiroptera, which actually includes the majority of all bat species and families, with the remaining bats falling into the Yenterochiroptera. So this is the yin and yang of bats. And today we're going to
Mistic. So close. So close. I wonder if they'll talk about that one, because I'm curious. It's so close to my name. Ooh.
Discover every family of both the yin and the yang. So
Okay.
let's start with the yin,
Yin and
as
yang.
it's almost Halloween. So we might as well start out with the sinister bats of the Enterochiroptera. Though I would argue that the most sinister bats, at least as far as we are concerned, are on the yang side of the family tree. So much for our yin and yang dichotomy. Maybe all of the bats are great to discuss right before All Hallows Eve. Yeah. The Enterochiroptera itself contains 2 large clades. Possibly the least sinister of all bats, unless they're left-handed. I don't know if they favor their left wings. And those would be the megabats of the family Pteropotidae, with the remaining Enterochiropteran families falling into the clade Rhinolophoidea. I told you, the rhinoceroses with wings. Yeah. But the megabats look more like foxes with wings. Some are even called flying foxes. And in fairness, they're just as related to foxes as they are to rhinoceroses. Ooh. And these bats do have a very different face from most bats. Don't I? And they live in a very different way than most bats. Ooh. Because these bats generally do not use echolocation to navigate, but rather sight and smell. Which means that, like foxes, they have big eyes, long noses, and little ears compared to most other bats. It also means that their mouths and noses look more like those of typical mammal mouths and noses, since they aren't adapted to emitting insane high-frequency sounds, just eating and smelling and the like. They also aren't generally used to grab animals in flight, but rather fruit and nectar, which are considerably easier to catch. I like fruit. The largest of all bats, unsurprisingly, fall into this family, having a wingspan of nearly 6 feet, about 1.7 meters. Though some of the roughly 200 species of megabats are considerably smaller. They are all found in the Old World, especially near the equator, and they are all adorable. As for the Skynoceroses of the clade Rhinolophoidea, there are 6 families, 3 of which, starting with rhino, that fall into 2 clades, each containing 3 families. The least rhino of these 2 clades includes the families Rhinopomatidae, Megadermatidae, and Crassionycteridae, with the Megadermatidae and the Crassionycteridae being most closely related of the 3. The Rhinopomatidae, also called the mouse-tailed bats, even though they're more closely related to rhinos than mice, contains about 6 species. They live in the Old World, mostly North Africa and South Asia, and are frequently observed coming out of crevices in the Egyptian pyramids. No big deal. They have big ears and leaf-shaped noses, and a giant, skinny, hairless Mickey Mouse tail that is not attached to the wing membrane called the patagium. The Megadermatidae, often called the false vampire bats, is another small family containing around 6 species of big-eared, leaf-nosed bats, but this time with no tails at all, which is actually something they have in common with most of the megabats. They are also rather large for non-megabats. Found in Africa, Asia, and Australia, most are brown, but some are white, bluish, or even green. The family Crassionycteridae is composed of only 1 species, the bumblebee bat. This is the smallest of the 1,400 bat species and is in contention for being the smallest of all mammals. And it is remarkably small, especially considering that small animals have a relatively huge amount of surface area compared to their volume, and thus lose heat very rapidly. It isn't easy to be a tiny mammal, even without skin wings, but these guys are only a bit over an inch long, and that's pretty darn tiny. Also called the Kitti's hog-nosed bat due to their slightly upturned nose and possibly the fact that they're more closely related to both hogs and kitties than they are to rats or bumblebees. They're found in limestone caves in Myanmar and Thailand, which are places I would like to go in the future, but that we cannot afford to visit. So if you would like to see me look for bumblebee bats in the near future, please consider supporting us on Patreon. The most rhino of the 2 Rhinolophoidea clades includes the families Rhinonycteridae, Hippocideridae, and Rhinolophidae. Of these 3, the least closely related would be the 9 species of trident bats of the family Rhinonycteridae. They are called trident bats because their nose leaves often have a trident shape at the top. They're found mostly in Australia, Africa, and Madagascar. The more than 70 species of bats in the family Hippocideridae, because they're more closely related to hippos than rats, are also often called the Old World leaf-nosed bats. That's a funny common name, since other than the megabats, every group we have discussed so far has been Old World leaf-nosed bats. Well, these Old World leaf-nosed bats also live in the Old World, and they have a more rounded leaf nose. Their closest living relatives are the more than 100 species of horseshoe bats of the family Rhinolophidae, which are more closely related to both horses and rhinos than they are to rats. This is another Old World leaf-nosed bat that can be distinguished from their closest relatives, the Old World leaf-nosed bats, by their nose leaves, which are shaped like horseshoes instead of rounded leaves.
Wow.
And these guys may have had a role in some of the SARS-related coronavirus.
Okay, give me a minute. Had to let the dogs outside. Back to the bats.
Outbreaks that you may have heard about.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're on the subject of leaf noses, let's talk about leaf noses.
Yeah.
What the heck is with those leaf noses? Well, as you probably know, many bats use echolocation to navigate.
Yeah.
They bounce sound off of objects and then gain a mental picture of their surroundings based on how that sound bounces back, hence the big ears.
Yeah.
This means that you need to channel that sound in a predictable manner so that you can make sense of the echoes. And you can make that sound using either your mouth or your nose. It's generally pretty easy to tell how a bat makes that sound by looking at its nose. If it has small ears like a flying fox, it probably doesn't echolocate. But if it has big ears and a normal nose, it's probably a mouth screamer. If it has big ears and a crazy nose, it's probably a schnoz trumpeter. So far, all we have discussed are megabats and nasal shriekers, and all from the Old World. So let's shine a little light on the largest clade of bats, and the only clade found here in the Americas, the Yangochiroptera. Now, the majority of the bats fall into this clade. And I honestly can't find two phylogenies that tell the same story. So take a lot of these relationships with a grain of salt. In fact, it's a total mess as far as I can tell. So this might be a great place to build a PhD project, you know, if you're into that kind of thing. But in general, there seem to be three main clades, and I'm not going to declare which two of the three are most closely related. I'm going to leave it a polytomy, and I'll let you tell me during your dissertation defense. And I'm going to leave the relationships within these clades as polytomies as well. I'm really looking forward to reading your papers. But I definitely want to talk about each of these families because there are some really weird bats in here. So let's just start with the smallest of the three clades, the Emballoneuroidea, and I'll work my way to the biggest. The Emballoneuroidea contains just two families, the Emballonuridae and the Nycteridae. The Emballonuridae, comprised of a little over 50 species, are also known as the sack-winged or sheath-tailed bats, which are some pretty odd common names, but they make sense when you know something about these bats. The sac wings refer to small sac-shaped glands on their wings that release chemical signals called pheromones to attract mates, much like moths. Now, moths pick up on pheromones using their feathery antennae. Bats don't have antennae. They smell with their noses. And the sac-winged bats have longer noses than most bats that aren't megabats. Additionally, there is no nose leaf, but they have big ears, so you can probably guess that this is a buccal blaster. As for the sheath tails, the wing membrane, the uropatagium, of sheath-tailed bats extends most of the way up the tail, but the end of the tail extends outside of it. Most tailed bats either have their tail entirely attached to the uropatagium or not at all. If it is attached, then the wing membrane is bigger and can be modified by the legs and tail, which is good for flight. But it is difficult to use the legs for locomotion. If the tail is free, the opposite is true. Well, the tail on the sheath-tailed bats is not connected directly to the tail, but rather the tail sits in a sheath, and the uropatagium can be moved by the legs to include more or less of the tail, essentially giving them the option of having a free tail or not, depending on the application. These tiny bats are found in tropical and subtropical parts of basically every continent with such regions. They're closest relatives, and this is the last time I will be saying that today, since all of the other clades are going to be polytomies that you're going to sort out. But their closest relatives are the roughly 15 species of the family Nycteridae, the slit-faced or hollow-faced bats. These bats are a bit larger than their cousins and have a distinctive concavity, almost like a pit or a canyon in the middle of their face. But it can be difficult to see because of their fur. I'm sure they didn't notice it because they have absolutely dinky eyes. They look like river dolphin eyes. And like river dolphins, these guys are highly, highly reliant on echolocation to find food. And you can tell that just by looking at those enormous ears. They're huge. Not only do they have big ears for echolocating, but these bats will also just sit on a perch and listen. And their nose has nasal shrieking written all over it, though they use relatively quiet calls to echolocate, probably because with ears like that, you don't need to be very loud. Their tail is totally webbed into the uropatagium, which aids the short, broad wings to have a lot of surface area so that these bats can hover when hunting. These bats are found in and around the tropical regions of Africa, and I doubt you will confuse them with anything else in the area. The second smallest clade in the Yangocheiroptera are the Vespertilionoidea, which contains the families Miniopteridae, Cistugidae, Molosidae, Natalidae, and Vespertilionidae. So let's start with the family Miniopteridae, the long-winged or bent-winged bats. Now, all bats have bent wings. There are no hummingbird bats, but I reckon that you can guess why they're called long-winged bats, or at least you can get close. Their wings are actually not all that long, but their bodies are disproportionately tiny. So their individual wings are more than twice the length of their head and body combined. So they might be called mini because of their mini bodies. They have the nose morphology of a bugle shouter, so they look nothing like the leaf-nosed bats. And their big ears and short faces will tell you that they aren't megabats. But to tell them apart from other oral howlers, their tails are included in the wing webbing, though we have seen that before. What is really unique is their long wings and that they lack the locking tendon in their feet to lock them in a hanging position. So I doubt that these bats will ever be found hanging when at rest. I have only ever seen them sprawled out on all fours like a pterosaur. And I know that the adaptations to this form of locomotion account for the name bent-winged bats. Because like I said, all bats have bent wings. The roughly 40 species of these little pterosaur bats are found in the Old World only. Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and lots of islands in the vicinity. The family Cistugidae includes only 2 species, the hairy bats or gland-winged bats from Africa. Now, all bats are hairy, so I don't really get that. In most ways, this is a fairly typical looking little bat. Big ears, no nose leaf, and that tells you something about if and how it screams at the world. Its tail is entirely webbed into the uropatagium, but it has 2 to 3 soft glands in its wings near the forearm that really distinguish these bats from any others. So if you catch a bat like this in Africa and it has those wing glands, you probably know what you have. The family Molosidae is the second largest family in the Vespertilionoidea and the 4th largest family of all bat families with over 125 species. Now these are often called the free-tailed bats, as nobody tells their tails what to do, or because they're almost completely free of the uropatagium. Though they do have a ring of cartilage that can slide the uropatagium down the tail using muscles during flight, giving them massive control over their wing surface. This helps to make them the fastest, highest flying, and among the most maneuverable of all bats, and probably contributes to their near global distribution. They honestly look a lot like sheath-tailed bats, but without the wing glands. The 12 species in the family Natalidae are about the weirdest looking bats I have ever seen. Also called funnel-eared bats because of their big funnel ears. I would call them ears and mouth bats, or where the heck are your eyes and nose bats? For the record, they have really long tails, which are completely webbed into the uropatagium. But mostly, if you're in the New World and you find a bat with big ears, a big mouth, and you really aren't sure if it has eyes or a nose, well, you know what you have. They're the largest family in the Vespertilionoidea, and the largest of all bat families with nearly 500 species is the family Vespertilonidae. For the record, nearly 10% of all described mammal species are Vespertilonid bats. Also known as Vesper or simple-nosed bats, they have a fairly stereotypical face with large ears and a nose and eyes that you can actually see, but no nose leaf. So, you know they're teeth talkers. Vesper meaning evening, which is pretty normal for bats. Now, of course, in a lot of ways, this is the standard bat. They are found all over the world. Pretty much anywhere that is warm enough to have bats has Vespertilonid bats. Sorry, Antarctica. And that brings us to the last bat clade that we have to discuss today, the 7 families of the Noctilinoidea. And let's start with the family for which the whole clade was named, the Noctilionidae. The Noctilionidae, also known as bulldog bats or fishing bats, includes only 2 species, the greater and lesser bulldog bats. These are orange to brown bats with large, strong feet for grabbing prey and faces that look like jowly dogs, hence the name. And for the record, they are more closely related to bulldogs than they are to rats. If you're in Central or South America and you catch a bat that isn't a free-tailed bat and has the face of a bulldog, bingo is his name-o. Next are the 5 species of disc-winged bats of the family Thyropteridae. These Central and South American bats can be identified by the presence of a disc-shaped suction cup on the bottom of each thumb and on their feet that allows them to cling to leaves while roosting. These little suckers usually hang out, head up, inside of curled young leaves during the day. They have faces that look like big-eared, small-eyed hedgehogs. No nose leaf. But those suction cups should be enough to tell you what you have. The family Reptiles is another 2-species family that includes the smoky bat and the thumbless bat. These Central and South American bats basically look like a brown, furry egg with wings. Big, broad ears, and an eyeball at the base of each ear, like the ear funnels light into the eye or something. But their most diagnostic feature is that their thumbs do not protrude out of the wing, and they may be absent altogether, hence the name. The roughly 18 species of ghost-faced, naked-backed, and mustached bats of the family Mormoopidae look basically like Ferengis, but with crazy leaf lips, fur, and wings. And just to be clear, that is not a nose leaf. These are leaf lips. They're crazy looking and found in North, Central, and South America. The largest family in the Noctilinoidea, the second largest and most ecologically diverse of all bat families, is the family Phylostomidae. I would also argue that this family contains the most sinister of all bats, at least as far as we're concerned. These are the over 200 species of New World leaf-nosed bats. If you're in the Americas and you find a snot rocket chowder, you know what you have. Now, most are insectivores, but some eat fruit, like New World megabats. The spectral bat, the largest bat in the Americas, eats pretty good-sized birds that it catches in flight. Lots of them eat a wide diversity of smaller vertebrates, and one of them eats people. Okay, it probably doesn't eat people very often, but they drink vertebrate blood, and you are a vertebrate with blood for now. In addition to being a leaf-nosed bat in the New World, they also lack a tail. They really shouldn't be difficult to identify. And that gets us to our final two bat families. Thank you for sticking with me. If you've made it this far, you should join us over on Patreon for more bat content, because you're clearly into this kind of thing. Yeah. But let's get to those final two. Now, the family Mysopodidae is probably the family of bats that we've covered that you are the least likely to have ever seen before. There are only two species in this family, and they are the only family of bats endemic to the island of Madagascar. These are the sucker-footed bats. I bet you can guess what these bats have. But in case you can't, these little suckers have suckers on their wrists and ankles. These are very similar to the suckers on the disc-winged bats of the Americas, but they work a bit differently, and they're in Madagascar. So if you're looking at a bat with suckers and you're not sure which one it is, ask yourself if you saw a chameleon or a lemur today as well. Now, the suckers on these little Malagasy suckers are not so much suckers as they are sticky pads. These bats use a form of sweating through their pads to generate wet adhesion, like a tree frog, and not suction like a disc-winged bat. But, like disc-winged bats, sucker-footed bats also sleep head up inside of rolled-up leaves during the day. And because those leaves are difficult for arthropods to climb, they rarely have parasites like most other bats. And that brings us to the final family of bats, the Mystacinidae. And if there is a family of bats that you're less likely to have seen than the sucker-footed bats, then it would be these, the New Zealand short-tailed bats. And New Zealand, a place I have been blessed to visit, and to
I've
which
never been
I would
there.
like to return in the future, has some of the weirdest biodiversity on Earth. For one thing, when humans first arrived in New Zealand, the only mammals on the island were bats. And these bats live only in New Zealand. New Zealand has a lot of birds that spend an inordinate amount of time on the ground. Many, like kiwis, fill ecological niches filled by terrestrial mammals, usually. And these little bats decided to get in on the New Zealand ground game as well. Though they can fly, they spend a considerable amount of time on the ground eating about all of the things that you would eat if you were stuck on an island looking for food. They eat insects, fruit, pollen, carrion, and nectar. Historically, there were two species, though one may have gone extinct in the 1960s. They have some unique ground bat adaptations, such as leathery sheaths for their wings and special claws for digging and climbing. And a 2010 study showed that a single feral cat killed 100 of these bats in a single week. So if you haven't seen our video on cats, please keep your cats indoors. And on that happy note, be sure to check out all of our other fun Halloween videos, because it's always Halloween in my soul. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon.
Look at.
Let me know what species you think I might be, or like what category I fall under, because I have an idea of what species I might be lore-wise, but that could always change. So, let me know what you think I would be, or which one's your favorite. They're also cute, but I like the one that has Mistic in the name. So, 'cause me. But let me know what you thought and what you think of bats. If you hate bats, why are you here? I bet I can convert you to bat favoritism words. Subscribe for more bats. But until next time, bye bye.